idea is to talk about stories in the vein of this idea of achieve excellence, don't avoid errors. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and now I see it everywhere. I see it in posters in corporate offices. I see it in the things they say to people. I see it in the way that we measure the number of accidents on a construction site. Over and over and over again, I see this. I have a number of stories here. Some of them are, how do you respond when there is a problem? Because it's easy to say the words, but it really matters, I think, what is the organizational response to an error? Because without changing that, then we're not going to get any different behavior. Memories obviously live by being quiet. We die when we make noise. There's a thing called a transient, a sound transient, which is, say, imagine someone opens a valve too fast. You can do this at home. If you open one of your water valves really quickly, you might go, it's called water hammer. It might go thump, 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 thump. Well, that's a sound transient that goes out in the ocean. You can get detected, and you get shot, and you get killed. Whenever there's a transient on the ship, sonar generally, because they have 3 or 4 or 5 people just listening on headphones, will hear it. But they don't know exactly what it is or where it came from. They have a general sense. And then what would happen is they would call the control room and they would say, hey, transient, own ship. And everyone would go, ah. And then in control, the officer of the deck or the captain would say, call around and find out who made that noise. And we'd be on the phones, calling the torpedo room, calling the engine room. Calling Chuck down in the supply. It'd be some guy in the supply room would have closed the locker just a little too quickly. And that metal on metal contact. And it was a witch hunt. And of course, no one admitted to making the sound. I said, this is crazy. Why don't we just do this? If you make a sound, call the control room and tell us, hey, you just probably heard a transit. It was me. We were in the engine room. We were doing this, blah, blah, blah. And it's not we're not going to have a big after action session. Flip the whole thing on its head. You call us. So then what would happen is that sonar would say transient own ship. And in the control room, the behavior we needed to change was that we had to suppress that urge to call around and find out what happened. We just have to sit there, sit on our hands. And then the phone would ring and it'd be someone in the machinery room saying, hey, I just opened a trim and drain valve, might have caused a transient. Now, the interesting thing was we started getting all these phone calls. Most of them sonar never even heard. And so the ship actually became quieter. The Santa Fe was one of the quietest, if not the quietest ships in our class. The crew owned the quietness. It wasn't something that was imposed on them. But I will tell you, so we were doing an inspection, and it was a tactical inspection. I was sitting in the control room. It was submarine on submarine warfare when these noises are really particularly important. And sonar heard a noise, and they called it the control room, con sonar, transient own ship. The inspectors were all standing there with their notebooks, furiously scribbling, 11, 16, and 37 seconds, transient own ship. And then they looked over at the person who on every other ship would be picking up the phone and calling around. And he did nothing. And I'm sitting there like, oh my gosh, I hope someone calls in. and the inspectors were furiously scribbling, ships not following up on noise transients, blah, blah, blah. And then sure enough, the phone rang. Someone in the machinery room, hey, I closed the trim and drain valve too hard. It was like magic. It was just, to me, it just felt like magic.